right, so we'll pick up in chapter 7 where we left off. We are in verses 32 through 35. 32 through 35, instructions to the unmarried. That section is verses 25 through the remainder of the chapter. Verse 32, but I would have you without carefulness. He that is unmarried careth for the things that belong to the Lord, how he may please the Lord. He that is unmarried, careth for the things that belong to the Lord, how he may please the Lord. But he that is married careth for the things that are of the world, how he may please his wife. There is difference also between a wife and a virgin. The unmarried woman careth for the things of the Lord, that she may be holy both in body and in spirit. But she that is married careth for the things of the world, how she may please her husband. And this I speak for your own profit, not that it may cast a snare upon you, but for that which is comely, and that you may attend upon the Lord without distraction. So Paul detailed the reason he suggested that the single remain in such a state. Under their present distress, verse 26, the single would have an advantage. Paul did not condemn the secular aspects of life. Paul did not use apostolic authority to place a snare upon them. His advice was for their benefit, not their burden. His counsel was calmly, decorous, noble, honorable. It is a matter of propriety because of the current distress that one remain as he or she is. Verse 36, but if a man think that he behaveth himself uncomely toward his virgin, if she pass the flower of her age, and need so require, let him do what he will. He sinneth not, let them marry. A father with a mature virgin did not sin by allowing her to marry. Brother Hampton, quoting Lipscomb, stated, in that age and country, the father disposed of his daughters in marriage without consulting them, and his will was the law in the matter. Verse 37, nevertheless, he that standeth steadfast in his heart, having no necessity, but hath power over his own will, and hath so decreed in his heart that he will keep his virgin, doeth well. The father of said virgin daughter had every right to refuse his daughter to marry if he felt it was in her best interest at the time. On the other hand, if the father, who had the authority to make family decisions in those days, did not feel the marriage was expedient, he had the authority to refrain his daughter under such conditions. Brother Jackson. Verse 38, so then, he that giveth her in marriage doeth well, but he that giveth her not in marriage doeth better. Whatever the father decided would be good. However, the decision to refuse his daughter's marriage would be better because it was in her best interest. Either solution of the problem on the part of the parents and guardians was acceptable. But, as throughout this chapter, due to the present distress, Paul still recommended, although he did not command, not to give the daughter's hand in marriage. Verse 39 and 40. The wife is bound by the law as long as her husband liveth, but if her husband be dead, she's at liberty to marry to whom she will, only in the Lord. But she is happier if she so abide after my judgment, and I think also that I have the Spirit of God. So to conclude, Paul made it absolutely clear that if a virgin married, especially during their present distress, she needed to understand that the marriage was for life, and the only approved dissolution of the marriage was death or fornication. If her husband died and she decided to marry again, the stipulation was that she could remarry only in the Lord. The phrase has been one of controversy even amongst the most conservative commentators. Many scholars indicate the phrase means the widow can only marry a Christian. Others propose the phrase allows the widow to only marry in accordance with God's will. The new spouse has never been married, or the new spouse is scripturally divorced, regardless if they are a Christian. The issue with that position, and this is my conviction here, the issue with that latter position is that it implies that it is God's will that a Christian marry a non-Christian. You would have to imply that that is God's will. That's part of God's will for the Christian to marry a non-Christian. Paul, the same apostle, wrote in Ephesians chapter 5, verse 15 through 17, let's be wise, understanding what the will of the Lord is. All right, Paul's judgment in this matter was not due to personal desire, though he did not have a direct commandment from Jesus. He was an inspired apostle and had the mind of the Spirit. His comment here may be a subtle defense of his apostleship and his inspiration from God, tincture. All right. So let us jump into chapters 8 and 9.
So which is Mary Christian?
Marry a Christian.
Mary Christian.
Yeah. Yes, sir. Marry a Christian. Marry in the Lord. Chapter 8, knowledge must be accompanied by love, verses 1 through 3. Knowledge must be accompanied by love. Now, as touching things offered unto idols, so again, Paul is addressing the things that they wrote to him. Now, as touching things offered to idols, we know that we all have knowledge. Knowledge puffeth up, but charity edifieth. Paul used his typical transition to move to the next inquiry, eating meat sacrificed to idols. There were two primary thoughts. A, one was allowed to eat the meat. B, such meats were not permissible. Both claim to have proper knowledge to justify their position without regard to the other. However, Brother Kaufman stated, knowledge without love was the grossest ignorance. Verse number 2. And if any man think that he knoweth anything, he knoweth nothing, yet as he ought to know. Knowledge can be deceiving. Socrates professed, I know that I know nothing. That's what Socrates. Socrates said, I know that I don't know anything. Right? The man that knows something knows that he knows nothing at all. All right? A person who seems to know everything, they show their ignorance by a lack of humility, and in this matter, the Corinthians were displaying theirs. Verse number 3. But if any man love God, the same is known of him. Their knowledge was based on their understanding of the one true God. If they truly knew God, then they should have shown one another love in this matter, because in that, God would know them, which is much more important. Right? God would know them, which is much more important. The Lord knows them that are his. 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 19. Verse number 4. As concerning, therefore, the eating of those things that are offered in sacrifice unto idols, we know that an idol is nothing in the world, and that there is none other God but one. And so Paul is now ready to address the actual question, causing him to move from the egotistical positions that they were taking. If they truly understood the one true God, then by default, an idol can't be anything. So Paul said, listen, you guys claim that you know. You claim you have knowledge to justify your position about either why you can eat the meat or why you can't eat the meat. But if you have true knowledge, then your true knowledge, right, would affirm that there's only one God. And so if you have true knowledge that there's only one God, then you can't be arguing over whether you can eat meat sacrificed to idols, because the idol is not the true God. There is only one true God. So by default, the idol is nothing, by default. But you say you have knowledge, right? You say you have knowledge. So the idol can't be anything. Verses 5 and 6. For though there be that are called gods, whether in heaven or in earth, as there be gods many and lords many, but to us there is but one God, the Father, of whom are all things, and we in him, and one Lord, Jesus Christ, by whom are all things, and we by him. So idolatry defines polytheism, right? That idolatry is the definition, or polytheism and idolatry are definitions of one another. It's a belief in many gods. That's what polytheism is. You and I are monotheistic theists. We believe in one God. Judaism, Jews are monotheists. They believe in one God. All right. They believe in the God of which is why they would take up stones to kill Jesus in John 8, 59 and following. When in verse 58, Jesus said, in verses 51 and following, that Abraham, your father. It just made me think about this. Did you notice he said your father? He didn't say our father, Abraham. You ever notice that? John 8, 51 and following. He said, your father, Abraham, rejoice to see my day. He didn't say our father. Isn't that interesting? He's literally claiming deity, like, I was before Abraham. He's not my father. I'm his father. He said, your father, Abraham, rejoiced to see my day, and he saw it and was glad. They say, you're not even 50 years old. You're not even 50 years old, yet Abraham has seen your day. And remember what Jesus said before Abraham was? I am. And what did they seek to do after that? They took up stones to kill him. You know why? It's not that he was just claiming to be a man. It was because they knew he was claiming to be on equality with God. He was claiming to be on par with the Father. Therefore, they say, listen, there's one God, and you are claiming to be equal with him? Right? This is why they were going to kill him. Right? This is why they wanted to kill Jesus in John chapter 8. Because the Jews were monotheists. Right? Christians are monotheists. We believe in the one God. We believe in the three persons that make up the one God, the Father, Son, and the Spirit. We believe in the Godhead, the one divine nature. Right? But with three persons make up the divine nature. They are the divine nature. Colossians 2:9. For in him dwelleth all the fullness of the Godhead bodily. Right? That's Christ. He is God. So we believe in the one God. But paganism, it worships everything. You think about paganism and pantheism, right? When you talk about pantheism, worshiping the mountains and the water and the trees and the wind, and that's pantheism, right? Or God is in everything. God is in. He's in the leaf. He's in the caterpillar. God is. It's pantheism. You worshiping insects and leaves and streams and rivers. You everything is God. And so paganism, it is all over the place. It's just, you have images, you have carvings, you have nature, you have mythology. Like paganism is just all over the place. And so paganism worships everything from heaven, the stars, moon, sun, everything, to the earth, trees, rivers, animals, insects. But Judeo-Christianity is monotheistic. One God, Deuteronomy 6:4, the one mediator between God and man, 1 Timothy 2:5. The one God Paul referred to is the Godhead, Acts 17:29, Romans 1:20, Colossians 2:9. The divine nature comprised of three persons, the Father, Son, and Spirit. The Father is the architect of creation, as physical and spiritual. The Son is the agent of creation, physical and spiritual. And the Holy Spirit is the manager of creation, physical and spiritual. Verse number 7. Howbeit there is not in every man that knowledge, for some with conscience of the idol unto this hour eat it as a thing offered unto an idol, and their conscience being weak is defiled. So some at Corinth illustrated their lack of knowledge regarding the one true God. They had been so accustomed to idolatry that they conflated the idol and the meat. They said the meat was the idol. It became the idol. The problem is not that all people have the same level of knowledge on such issues. Some, for example, in their pre-Christian lives, were so heavily involved with idol worship that they have an extremely difficult time making a distinction between the meat and the actual idol. They couldn't even tell the difference between the two. Their lives were so entrenched in idolatry, the meat might as well have been an idol. Their conversion was a complete turn from what they had known. Their zeal caused them to deny anything that remotely resembled idolatry, resulting in a weak conscience. And violation of one's conscience is a sin. Romans 14:5 and verse 23. When you go beyond your conscience, you sin against your conscience. You sin against yourself. And when a man violates his conscience, he assaults the central monitor of his spiritual life. Now, this is why some people, Paul would say in 1 Timothy 4, conscience sealed with a hot iron. Even in Acts 23, you guys remember when Paul stood before his Jewish brethren, he said, brethren, I've lived before God in all good conscience to this day. Even though he was wrong, but he thought he was doing right. He was trying to do right. Saul of Tarsus wasn't trying to be a boogeyman. Right? He literally said, I have lived in all good conscience before God even unto this day. Until this very present moment. Everything I've ever done, I've done it with a good conscience, believing I was doing right. I persecuted the church unto death. I thought it was a blasphemous offshoot of Judaism. It calls for death in the Old Testament. Right? I didn't know. I was ignorant. I did it with a good conscience. And so when you violate your conscience, right? When you violate your conscience, you sin. Right? You go beyond your conscience. You assault the central monitor of your spiritual life, and regardless of whether or not the conscience is properly instructed, the violation of it is a spiritual disaster, Brother Kaufman. Verse number 8. But meat commendeth us not to God, for neither if we eat are we better, neither if we eat not are we the worse. Food is neither moral nor immoral. Food itself is amoral. It's neutral. Like food in and of itself is neutral. Food cannot inherently be evil or good. However, it can become evil if it violates your conscience. Right? It can become evil if it violates your conscience. Eating meat sacrificed to idols was a liberty. We'll see that in verse number 9 here. Therefore, the meat did not become impure by that which literally does not exist, the idol. So when you have a proper knowledge, is what Paul is saying, you'll know this. You'll know that an imaginary idol, right, something that actually don't even exist, cannot make the meat unclean. It's literally impossible. But here's where it's possible, though. Here is where it's possible. If you violate here, that's when it becomes evil. That's when it becomes sinful. Okay, that's when we've got a problem. The meat itself was not unclean. God's kingdom is more than earthly quibbles. God's kingdom is more than earthly quibbles. Verse number 9. But take heed lest by any means this liberty of yours become a stumbling block to them that are weak. Would they choose their liberty over another soul? That's the question. That's the question. Will you choose your liberty? That is to eat meat sacrificed to idols. I want to be very careful that we keep this passage, this chapter, and also chapter 10. I'm going to caution us to make sure we keep them in their proper context. Meat sacrificed to idols. Right? This is the liberty that Paul is talking about here. Okay, meat sacrificed to idols. Verse 10 through 12. For if any man see thee which has knowledge sit at meat in the idol's temple, shall not the conscience of him which is weak be emboldened to eat those things which are offered to idols? And through thy knowledge shall the weak brother perish for whom Christ died? But when ye sin so against the brethren, and wound their weak conscience, ye sin against Christ. If a weak brother witnessed a knowledgeable brother, he that understands that idol is nothing, and that there is only one true God, he sees him sitting in the pagan temple, in a pagan temple, a pagan idol temple, enjoying the meat that was sacrificed to the idol, it might cause the weak brother to violate his own conscience by feeling pressured to eat the meat. He's like, man, I don't know about this. I just don't feel right. But Reggie's eating, and he's, he seems to have it all together. He's mature. He knows the scripture, but I guess it's okay. But this feels icky. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it can cause a conflict within that weak brother's conscience. So Paul said, will you do that? That's the question. The question is not the knowledge. The question is, how will you act on that knowledge, right? Jackson noted that pagan temples, pardon me, pagan temples had banquet rooms where meals were served to finance temple expenses. And so, though permissible, expedience really should dictate that case, right? All things are lawful and all things are expedient. Right? All things are lawful and all things are expedient. Though permissible, the expedience should dictate. Like, I could have a Bible study with a woman, but I'm not going to do it by myself. Right? Taking my wife, I'm taking Bill, call Bill to go with me, or something, right? It's lawful, but it's not expedient. Some things you just have to make sure you're like, hey, is this expedient? Right? That can save a lot of heartache, right? That can save a lot of heartache. So the idea that Christians would would grace such a place would confuse the gospel message. To recline at a banquet in the temple of Poseidon or Aphrodite, especially in such a place as Corinth, was certainly an extravagant assertion of their right to Christian liberty. Brother Kaufman called it extravagant. Right? You are definitely using your liberty if you're sitting in the idol temple eating meat, which is permissible. But man, you are fully exercising your liberty. Is that the expedient thing to do? That's what we're asking. Also, it could cause irreparable damage to a brother's soul. In that event, Christ's death on that man's behalf ends up being for nothing. If one caused another to lose their soul, that brother not only sinned against the perished brother, but he also sinned against the Lord, because he stated, if a brother causes another to violate his conscience, not only have I sinned or that brother sinned against the brother whose conscience has been violated, but as an extension, he's also sinned against Christ, for whom, right, he died. Right? Christ died for that brother. He died for his soul, for you. So for a mature brother to violate that soul through the conscience is to also sin against Jesus. Such an irresponsible attitude, therefore, is a sin against the Lord. Brother Jackson. Verse 13. Wherefore, if meat make my brother to offend, I will eat no flesh while the world standeth, lest I make my brother to offend. Because Paul loved the brethren, he vowed that if eating meat sacrificed to idols caused his brethren to fall, he would permanently abstain from eating such meat. However, the inference is that if eating such meat did not cause his brethren to fall, Paul would continue to eat the meat. We've got to keep the passage in its context. Paul was not addressing every little hang-up or every little thing that may have been sensitive to a brother's conscience. And this is why I made that kind of preliminary statement earlier, that we make sure we keep 1 Corinthians 8 and 10 in their proper context, because what will happen is, if we allow 1 Corinthians chapter 8 and chapter 10 to stand for all actions outside of eating meat sacrificed to idols, well, then we're going to open ourselves up to the whims and fancies and sensitivities, every little one, every little sensitivity a Christian might have. And that's not what Paul is talking about. Paul is specifically talking about meats sacrificed to idols. All right? He's not talking about whether or not somebody has a problem with us having a fellowship meal in a church building. That's not what he's talking about. He's talking about meats sacrificed to idols. So we want to make sure we stay in that context. Because there is a temptation to extend this beyond its context. All right? Brother Jackson has well articulated the conclusion of this chapter. Does this mean that one must capitulate to every bizarre whim of the contentious? It does not. When Judaizers attempted to compel the apostle to circumcise Titus to placate their doctrinal aberration, he refused to do so. Now, he circumcised Timothy, but we know why that was. Right? Acts chapter 16, verse 1 through 3. We know why Paul circumcised Timothy, but he didn't circumcise Titus. Galatians chapter 2, verse 3 and following. Why not? That's right. Titus was a fully Gentile. Timothy was mixed Jew and Greek. And so for Timothy to preach to the Jews, it was expedient for him to be circumcised. Not Titus. Paul refused vehemently. No, absolutely not. Titus will not be circumcised. Timothy circumcised. Right? So Paul didn't fall to the whims and fancies of those Judaizing teachers whose consciences were still connected to circumcision by Abraham. Right? Paul didn't bow to that. But but knowing the Jew and knowing how they felt about their own, it was expedient to circumcise Timothy. Timothy's going to go preach to Jews. In order for them to ever have an open ear to Timothy, he had to be circumcised. All right. The quality of the weak must be evaluated on more levels than one, and there's an ultimate limitation. The church is not required to accommodate every hobbyist who threatens to leave the fellowship if he doesn't get his way. The body of Christ must not be reduced to the level of its most ignorant and antagonistic. And I agree with Brother Jackson. I agree with Brother Jackson there. This is why it's very important that we keep these passages in their proper context. Okay, because there is the temptation to extend them beyond that to other quibbles. Okay? All right, chapter 9. Here we go. First section. An affirmation of apostleship, verses 1 through 3. Am I not an apostle? Am I not free? Have I not seen Jesus Christ our Lord? Are not ye my work in the Lord? In chapter 8, Paul addressed the strong bearing the weak. He now provides proof of the statement made in verse number 13. As an apostle, Paul had the highest authority to enjoy the same liberties as others. It seems some questioned his apostleship, but it was proven in that he had, number one, seen the risen Christ, and number two, he himself established Corinth. He established a congregation, imparting to them miraculous gifts. He's like, my goodness, I know I'm an apostle. You know I'm an apostle. I gave y'all spiritual gifts. Right? How are you questioning my apostleship? I gave y'all the ability to speak in tongues and perform these miraculous acts, these manifestations of power. Verses 2 and 3. If I be not an apostle unto others, yet doubtless am I to you. For the seal of mine apostleship are you, or are ye in the Lord? My answer to them that do examine me is this. Though there may have been many who question Paul's apostleship, it couldn't be honestly, right? It could not honestly be the faithful brethren at Corinth. There had to be some another group there. It couldn't be those who knew Paul and he had laid his hands on. The Corinthians themselves were proof of his apostleship. For those who did question his apostleship, Paul had some questions for them. Verses 4 and 5. Paul's right to financial support, verses 4 through 12. Have we not power to eat and to drink? Have we not power to lead about a sister, a wife, as well as other apostles, and as the brethren of the Lord and Cephas? The apostles and gospel preachers had a right to financial support by the church. Certainly some commit fraud against the church. 2 Peter 2:3, they make merchandise of it. However, the principle remains true. Paul refused such liberties with Corinth. You know, Paul wouldn't take money from Corinth. As a matter of fact, when he was with Corinth, when we were studying, for those of you who were studying the prison epistles for that course, Paul was being supported by Philippi when he was working in Corinth. Church at Philippi supported Paul. He wouldn't take anything from these people. Like, no, there's no way in the world you all are going to be able to say, oh, Paul preaches for money. Paul said, nope, absolutely not. You won't be able to say that about me. I won't take a dime from you. Philippi supported Paul while he labored in Corinth. And so some do make merchandise of the church. But that doesn't negate the truth of the matter that the apostles and gospel preachers were worthy of financial support by the church. Paul refused such liberties, but Paul also had the right to enjoy those same liberties. He had the right to be married, a sister. He had the right to marry a sister, right? A Christian. Paul also had the right to enjoy the same liberty to be married, as did the Lord's brothers and Peter. But he refused that liberty, and we just saw that in chapter 7. Why? We saw why he refused that liberty. Verse number 6. Or I only and Barnabas, have not we power to forbear working? Did Paul and Barnabas not have the same right to the treasury as did others? It appears that Barnabas also gave up his right to be supported by the churches. And while commendable in the highest degree, this renunciation of the right to support on the part of Paul and Barnabas resulted in their being looked down upon by some who were steeped in the culture of the Greeks. Verse 7. Who goeth a warfare at any time at his own charges? Who planteth the vineyard and eateth not of the fruit thereof? Or who feedeth the flock and eateth not of the milk of the flock? Surely they could see the principle being carried out in everyday life. The soldier is financially supported by the government. The planter of the vineyard, he can eat of the fruit that he plants. Is not the shepherd at liberty to drink the milk from the flock that he protects and provides for? As Kaufman correctly observed, these examples are pointedly appropriate in their application to ministers of the gospel. Verse 8 through 10. Say I these things as a man, or saith not the law the same also? For it is written in the law of Moses, thou shalt not muzzle the mouth of the ox that treadeth out the corn. Doth God take care for oxen? Or saith he it altogether? For our sakes, no doubt, this is written, that he that ploweth should plow in hope, and he that thresheth in hope should be partner of his hope. Was Paul's point proven by mere human illustrations? Not at all. His positions were supported by the law. Paul quoted Deuteronomy 25:4. This injunction was for the care of the oxen. How much more valuable are ministers than oxen? Paul said, now if the oxen, right, if you are commanded to not muzzle the mouth of the ox when he's treading the corn, how much more deserving is a gospel preacher, right, who is preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ to souls, the riches of heaven? But you understand that an ox can, but you will bicker at the liberties that a gospel preacher has. I mean, listen, it's some people see it that way, honestly. Verse 11, if we have sown unto you spiritual things, is it a great thing if we shall reap your carnal things? So the principle of sowing and reaping is not only a material one, but a spiritual one. If Paul sowed spiritual things to the Corinthians, it was only right that he be able to reap earthly blessings from them. This suggests they acknowledge the logic in providing support for physical labor, yet they see no value in supporting those who labor on their spiritual behalf. They understand if somebody labors physically, you pay them, because they receive a physical benefit, but they didn't see the value in their spiritual benefit. That's what Paul is saying. Verse number 12, if others be partakers of this power over you, are not we rather? Nevertheless, we have not used this power, but suffer all things, lest we should hinder the gospel of Christ. So it was clear the Corinthians understood Paul's right to financial support. They proved it because they financially supported others that labored there after Paul. It may be assumed that Paul would now request what he was rightfully due. However, he didn't. He wouldn't enjoy this liberty lest it hindered the work of the gospel. Interestingly, while Paul received financial support from other churches, Philippians chapter 4, verse 10 through 20, he would not from Corinth. Why? He would not by any means hinder the gospel by giving a reason for some to speak evil, saying, well, Paul only preaches for money. Paul said, I will not give you one excuse. I won't give you any ammunition. None. Verse 13, do you not know that they which minister about holy things live of the holy things of the temple, and they which wait at the altar are partakers with the altar? Paul making reference to the Levitical priesthood under the Mosaic system. The priests labored diligently, teaching, offering sacrifices on behalf of others, praying for others, maintaining the showbread, the candlesticks, the laver, the temple, and they were allowed their portion. Right? They were allowed their portion. And certainly gospel preachers are considered spiritual priests, as all Christians are. Verse 14, even so hath the Lord ordained that they which preach the gospel should live of the gospel. The Lord Jesus also ordained that they which preach the gospel should be allowed their portion. And now we can make reference to Luke 10:7 in this regard. The labor is worthy of their hire. The labor is worthy of their hire. Verse 15. But I have used none of these things, neither have I written these things, that it should be so done unto me. For if it were better for me to die, than that any man should make my glorying void. Again, Paul did not exercise the right to enjoy this liberty, nor did he demand such from the Corinthians. He would rather die. Paul would rather die than lend any level of credence to such malicious rumors and thus rob him of the glory inherent in serving the Lord. Brother Jackson. Verse 16. For though I preach the gospel, I have nothing to glory of, for necessity is laid upon me. Yea, woe is unto me if I preach not the gospel. To demand wages from the brethren would have been to glory in the position of an evangelist. Though Paul was trusted with the unsearchable riches of Christ, if he ever gloried, it was only going to be in the cross. To Paul, due to the Lord's commission, anything other than preaching the gospel was equal to condemnation. Paul said, if I do anything other than preach the truth of the gospel, I might as well be condemned. Verse 17, for if I do this thing willingly, I have a reward. But if against my will, a dispensation of the gospel is committed unto me. If Paul simply preached for money, his ministry would be reduced to mere management. However, if he preached the gospel without expectation of financial remuneration, his reward would be intrinsic rather than extrinsic. Right? He said, I have a reward for preaching the gospel in its purity just for the sake of the gospel. I have my reward. But if I ever turn that over, if I ever submit that to requesting being paid for preaching, then my reward is no longer intrinsic. It's no longer for the gospel's sake. Now I'm going to get extrinsic reward for that. And Paul said, I don't, that's condemnation to me. That was his position. Verse 18. What is my reward then? Verily that when I preach the gospel, I may make the gospel of Christ without charge, that I abuse not my power in the gospel. Paul's reward was to preach the gospel without financial expectation, therefore nullifying abuse of his liberty. Verse 19 and 20. For though I be free from all men, yet have I made myself servant unto all, that I might gain the more. And unto the Jews I became as a Jew, that I might gain the Jews. To them that are under the law, as under the law, that I might gain them that are under the law. Paul provided additional evidence of his selfless disposition. Paul was free. He was free to eat meat, sacrifice to idols. He was free to be married. He was free to receive financial support. Yet he made himself a servant. He forfeited those liberties. He forfeited them. Right? Paul said, listen, if my brother's conscience is going to be damaged and hurt and his soul be at stake because I eat meat sacrificed to idols, I won't do it. I'll forego that liberty. I've foregone the liberty of marriage so I can give myself fully to the ministry. I've foregone the liberty to be financially supported so that I can protect the gospel. Well, Paul said, I've given up these liberties. I'm a servant. I'm not free like everybody else. Of course, I could be. I could exercise my freedom, but I choose servitude. But I choose to be a servant for the salvation of souls. That's why. Paul said a soul is way more important. To the Jews, Paul became a Jew. He was already a Jew, right? However, he no longer considered himself a Jew except in an accommodative sense. Brother Kaufman. Paul understood the law of Moses had been nailed to the cross. He wrote it. Colossians chapter 2. He wrote it. But in certain moments of expedience, Paul would participate in Mosaic observances. Paul had completely broken from the law of Moses, yet for the salvation of his kinsmen, he became as one under the law. Remember what he said in Romans chapter 9? He said, I bear, my conscience bear witness. He said, I bear witness, in my conscience I lie not. Right? If he could be accursed from Christ for Israel's salvation, he would have done it. He would have done it. But he knew, chapter 10, he said, brethren, my heart's desire and prayer for Israel is that they might be saved. So I bear them record that they have a zeal of God, but not according to knowledge. And being ignorant of the righteousness of God and going about to establish their own righteousness, right, they have not submitted themselves to the righteousness of God. That's why Paul knew in chapter 9 that he couldn't be accursed from Christ, because they would not submit to righteousness, because that's the only way. Paul knew I lie not. Paul said, I'm not lying. If I could, if it were possible, and it wasn't, but if it were possible that if I could be accursed from Christ, Israel could be saved in their current state, Paul said I would do it. But he knew it was impossible, because they were not going to submit to the righteousness of God. And God is not going to save any person that's not going to submit to his righteousness through obedience to the gospel. 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 21. Right? So, you know, but Paul would become a Jew for the Jews. He would observe at sometimes some of the Mosaic observances, but he would become as one under the law. Verse number 21. To them that are without law, as without law, being not without law to God, but under law to Christ, that I might gain them that are without law. And so Paul will participate with those without law, the Gentiles, unless there was a conflict with the law of Christ. So Paul wouldn't participate in anything that was sinful, right? He wasn't going to participate in anything that was sinful. But if it wasn't sinful and it was an option, and not a matter of faith, but a matter of a scruple or something like that, Paul said, I'll participate in that. But it won't be against Christ. I won't go beyond the law of Christ. He knew the expedience in such matters. He knew that expedience is needed at times for the salvation of souls. He understood that. He understood that. Verses 22 and 23. To the weak became I as weak, that I might gain the weak. I made all things to all men, that I might by all means save some. And this I do for the gospel's sake, that I might be partaker thereof with you. Again, everything he did was for the gospel's sake. If Paul became a Jew for the Jews, it was for the gospel's sake. If he participated in the law ceremoniously with some of those aspects, like shaving, taking a vow, going to Jerusalem for the Passover or Pentecost, he did those things for the gospel's sake. If he participated in things with those who were without law, that is the Gentiles, not to go beyond the law of Christ, he did it for the gospel's sake. Everything he did was for the gospel's sake. Anything that was expedient, if he ever applied an expedient, it was for the gospel's sake. And so Paul refused to exercise right to liberties around those who misunderstood liberties. Now, how absurd to propose that Paul became a lawless man to save the lawless. Some will propose that Paul became lawless so he could save the lawless. That's crazy. That's absurd. That doesn't even fit the context, especially what he just stated. Amongst the Jews and Gentiles, he observed their customs, provided they did not transgress the law of Christ, right? Passover, eating meat sacrificed to idols. The ultimate goal was the salvation of some souls, all souls if possible, right? That would be great. But if he could save some, right? If he could save some, he would do it. Verse 24, know ye not that they which run in a race run all, but one receive the prize, so run that ye may obtain. Paul used Greek and Roman games to illustrate application. He alludes to the famous Corinthian races, which were conducted every 2 years, in which great honor was bestowed upon the victor. In contrast, all Christians can win this race, but genuineness and faithfulness and sobriety are required. Verse 25. And every man that striveth for the mastery is temperate in all things. Now they do it to obtain a corruptible crown, but we an incorruptible. Earthly athletes diligently practice self-discipline through grueling training so they might perform at mastery during the games. Hopefully, they would achieve the crown. Now, how diligent should Christians be in exercising spiritual discipline to achieve and arrive at perfection, realizing that our crown will be incorruptible? The Greeks vigorously trained and competed for a mere trophy of leaves. That crown that they received was just wilted. It would just be that garland crown, and it die. It just wilt. But Paul said, we have one that's incorruptible. That one's corruptible. Those leaves will just die. That garland will just die. But we have a crown that will never perish. We have a crown laid up for us, a crown of righteousness that will never corrupt. The Lord has promised the eternal crown. Verse 26 and 27. I therefore so run, not as uncertainly, so fight I, not as one that beateth the air, but I keep under my body and bring it into subjection, lest by any means when I have preached to others, I myself shall be a castaway. Paul was devoted to the ministry of Christ with absolute confidence, not as a runner unprepared for a race or a boxer that was unprepared for a fight. Paul said, I'm ready for the race. I'm ready for the fight. To the contrary, he kept his body. He buffeted. The American Standard Version would translate it. He kept under. He buffeted his body and totally submitted it to righteousness. To do otherwise was to be a hypocrite. Paul did not just talk the talk, but he walked the walk. Paul practiced what he preached. Friends, we have made it through 3 chapters in 2 hours. And I appreciate your undivided attention as the lesson was taught. We'll consider ourselves dismissed. May God bless you and keep you as you seek to conform your will to His. The next time we pick up, we'll be in chapter 10. We were running that race.